So Andrew, for those of you who don't know, and in fact if you don't know this, you should be ashamed of yourself and immediately go on the web and check, is I think the most cited computer vision researcher in the world. You know, Alyosha's professor sometimes questions this because we'll ignore that. He's not here, so it doesn't count. So of course I don't need to introduce a person who's the most cited vision researcher in the field, which means if you haven't gotten around to citing his paper, it can only mean three things. One is you haven't written a paper, which is bad. The other is if you've written a paper but haven't read any of Andrew's papers, that's even worse. And the third is in spite of reading Andrew's papers, you haven't bothered to cite it, which clearly shows your complete ignorance of the field. Now, there is not a subject in computer vision that Andrew has not worked on. I don't double negative. I got a little bit lost there. You fill in the blanks, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. And has been a leader, a champion, and a mentor of many students. Alyosha said that the greatest thing that happened in the last few years is that Andrew has now a family. As a result, the amount of blood that is left behind on the keyboards is less, or something like that. We're very happy to know that finally he's becoming human. And Andrew.
So what I want to share with you today is work on video analysis, which is something that Anandan is very, very keen on. So I thought that's what I'll talk on today. And what I'm going to talk about is not just my work, but sort of what we can do as a vision community. Because in the last 5 years, we've made tremendous progress as a vision community, and I want to bring that out a bit as well. So this isn't just me. But as a community, one of the things we'd like to be able to do is to understand video, and particularly humans in video, because for many of us, humans are the most interesting thing that goes on a lot of the time, and a lot of videos are about humans. And the sort of questions we'd like to be able to answer automatically are, in each shot of a video, who's there? You know, what are the people there? Where are they? In terms of the floor, the walls, what are their pose? You know, where are their limbs? That's what I mean by their pose in this case. And what are they doing? The actions, the activities, the movements of these people. We'd like to do that automatically for every single shot. And I'm going to concentrate today on the second 2 points, the pose and their actions and activities. So I'm going to motivate it by showing a couple of videos. And the first one, when I show this, people will groan, because this is sort of a viral video that almost everybody will have seen. So if I show this, who does not know what this is about? You're not hip, you know, you're not in with what's going on. So this is a video that's been seen all around the world, shared on Facebook, etc. And so I'll show it. So here's a woman walking along a road in Britain, and she comes across a cat, and she strokes it. Nice cat. And she looks around furtively. You see the same thing again now. And that's what she did. And this was captured. The homeowners had their own television. That's video. That's what's recording this. And they came home and couldn't find their cat, and then found it in the bin and played this back. And this has ruined her life completely. You know, some of us think. Yeah. So basically, they put this video up on the web. People recognised her. It's ruined her life. You know, she's having hospital problems. She's lost her job. You know, it's ruined her life. She can't explain why she did it. What, sorry?
Was she doing it as a joke, or
she won't say. She doesn't. You know, she says it's an aberration. Some people who don't like cats think, well, not bad. And some people who love cats, you know, think, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Okay. I thought a lot of people would have seen it. So I've got another video, more just because it's. If you know this actor, who's Christopher Walken, you can blow it there. Alyosha, what happens next? Okay, so this is one of the things which we're interested in, maybe in videos as well. Alyosha has mentioned this in the past, is predicting what's going to happen next in a video is an interesting thing to do. So okay, that's all I wanted to show is, there are many videos we'd like to interpret, and lots of fun videos, pop videos, etc. Okay. Now, one of the ways we can measure progress in a field is to look at the data that is used. And here's, for action recognition, this is a data set from 5 or 6 years ago that was created by Ivan Laptev and others. And the things to sort of notice here are there are various action classes, but in terms of the level of difficulty of the images from a computer vision point of view, these are quite simple in the sense of that the background is very plain, so the foreground background segmentation, which is one of the key problems, is fairly easy to do. They're actions which are acted out. These are being done by the students who are then going to run the experiments. In fact, I think that's Ivan Laptev himself. He's definitely one of these people. And they're repeated, so they're not very natural sequences. Okay. Now we go 5 years on, and here's the sort of actions and sort of data that's being used, again, by Ivan Laptev. These are taken from Hollywood movies. This is a Hollywood 2 data set. And you can now see, first of all, they're not done by the people who are doing the experiments. These are videos made by other people, because they're Hollywood films. You've got clutter, you've got different people, you've got different clothing, different camera viewpoints, not just static camera anymore. So the level of difficulty has just changed astronomically. Okay, so this is good as measuring progress in the field. Another thing to notice is that I'm going to be talking about action recognition in videos, but these show quite clearly that you can recognize the actions often fairly well just from a still. You don't really need the video. And that's the purpose of these icons, to show what the action is. We didn't need to see the video at all to get this right. Okay. Now, similarly, in pose, we can see how progress in pose has happened by looking at the videos, the data. So here, this is a few snapshots of recognition. So we're looking here at data sets that have been used for recognizing human pose in images. Okay, we're not trying to recognize 3D pose, just the layout of the limbs. And we had early work by Eyal from Foresight, work by Feltz and Schwab, where they actually did background subtraction, Feltz, Schwab and Hundlocker, background subtraction to solve the segmentation problem. And then there's work by Alyosha, where it's seemingly difficult, but then it's against fields. So the segmentation problem wasn't so hard. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Alyosha, but again, the difficulty wasn't so challenging compared to now. These are the sort of data sets which are appearing. This is the Pascal Challenge data set. These are images from Flickr. There are images from television, more images from Flickr. And you have the same problem. You have background clutter, you have different people, you have different viewpoints. So again, the level of difficulty and therefore the level of progress, you can just see it from this data set. Okay, so that's where we are as a community. What I'm going to talk about is how to do this now, how to recognize actions, how to recognize poses. Now, what most people do, not all of them, they take a video clip, say you want to recognize an action here. So this is a clip which I'm not going to show you from Run Lola Run. And what she does is she brings her hands up like this, as you can see in time, and then she screams. Okay, that's what happens in the film. But I'm not doing audio here. And what most people do to represent these types of clips is they take the whole spatial temporal volume, which is what I'm illustrating here, and then they use the sort of descriptions that have been used early on in object category recognition. So they use bag of visual words, or they might use hog for the whole environment. They might split it up, as shown here, into these sort of spatial temporal grids to give some spatial locality, some temporal locality. And that's pretty much what people use. And they feed this into a classifier, because you have training data where people do certain actions, you train the classifier, and then if they do the same actions for the same length of time in the test data, you can recognize it. Okay, that's pretty much what people are doing entirely. Now, what I want to argue for here are better representations. That's going to be one of the main points of this talk, and how to get these representations. So one representation, which is obvious really, is not to represent everything, but to carve out where the person is. And this is something we can do very reliably, as I'll show you. So what we can do is find a bounding box around the person in time, track that effortlessly in time, and that gives you some separation of foreground, background. It gives you a person-centered representation, so you can follow the person. Most people don't do this. And then an even stronger representation is to actually have the person and follow their limbs. If you're trying to describe what they're doing, know where their limbs are, the upper arm, lower arm, etc. Okay? So I'm going to talk about how to get these representations and then show some results based on these representations. So this is the outline of the talk. First part I'll do on actions, and then second part on pose. And if there's time at the end, I'll mention some challenges that we've put out for human layout and human actions. So the first part of the talk, which will be on the actions, I'm going to run through the basic method, getting the stronger representation. So that consists of detecting humans, linking up these detections to get human tracks. Then I'll talk about how we use those tracks and detect actions in the tracks, and then interactions between people using pairs of tracks. This is work by these people. Okay. So, to define the problem a bit more clearly, what we want to do, here's time running long, we want to do action detection. So what that means is we want to know where the action is in space. So here we want to localize the person who's doing the action. So this is an action of, from standing up, you can recognize the film maybe, and also in time. So it's a spatial temporal localization we want to do. Again, most people just classify a clip. They don't localize, particularly in time or in space. And the same thing for interaction, shown here. We want to, when you have a group of people, we want to say who's doing the interaction. This is a handshake interaction out of all these people, and localize in time and space. Okay? And that's how we'll also score if we're successful. It's not just we've recognized this action. We only recognize this action correctly if we localize it within some limits in space and time. So that's our challenge.
Sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about localizing in space and time, but what about, are these representations going to be invariant to the speed at which the action is done?
Well, that's how I do it. But that comes down to how I do it. But if the action's done very, very slowly, then the start point and the end point will be further apart than if the action's done very quickly. Yes? So some mention of, in fact, actions in videos are harder to find to detect correctly than you might think, because quite often in editing styles there are cuts. So the shot boundary is on an action. So if someone's standing up, this is shown here, as this guy stands up, right in the middle of the action, the camera changes, and so if you're detecting this action, you have to deal with these shot boundaries, okay, which happen very often. Not always, but it's an editing style. Right, so now I'm going to get down to the mechanics of it, the computer vision part of this. So, human detection and tracking. So, these are, again, things that we can do very well. You know, they're almost so reliable that we can say this is solved for upper body detection and in videos. So, the typical way of doing it is using a sliding window. And originally, the work which people used was by Dahl and Triggs using a hog detector. So this is a particular visual descriptor. More recently, work by Feltz and Schwab, Ramaman and others have improved the learning of this detector. It's a similar descriptor. It's a slightly extended descriptor, but the training now is better, uses a latent SVM, and that improves performance. So that's what we're going to use. And the way of doing this is to provide training data. So we provide training data from Hollywood films, different from the test data. So this is the sort of training data you provide. And then what comes out of detections, it's maybe a bit difficult to see, but detections like this. So you're finding the people, frontal pose, side pose, back pose. But you get some false positives, which is shown here. This is a false positive. And we're going to use the tracking for two reasons. One is to associate these detections. So at the moment, we're detecting in each frame independently. So we don't know if these detections correspond to the same people or not. So we have to do like a joining the dots. So we're going to join up the detections, but sometimes the detections won't happen. There'll be a misdetection, so we have to be able to track across frames where the person's there but they're not detected. And the second reason for doing the tracking is to throw away these false positive detections. Okay, so one is to identify the people, to link them together, so we have tracks of that person, and the second is to throw away mistakes. And on the right here, you can see colour-coded the people, and the mistakes have gone. And the way we're going to do the tracking is using something else very well developed in computer vision, which is a KLT tracker. So it finds interesting points, if you like, and then tracks these in time. This has been around for decades. It works very well, very fast. It's completely agnostic about what it's looking at. It doesn't care whether it's looking at people or cars. We're just using this general purpose tracker. So here's the sort of thing you can get. This is time going this way. You can see for this guy on the right, we detected him in every frame, and here are some tracks. On this guy on the left, you can see that he wasn't detected in this period, but we can still track him, so we can associate detections later on with detections early on. Okay, so that solves that problem.
Was he not in the scene? Or,
No, it just wasn't. It was below threshold on the detector. Something to notice is that it's like a technical detail here. Is what you might. We've been using this idea of associating by tracking for quite some time on faces, on heads. If you apply it on the whole upper body region, because here we're detecting upper bodies, it doesn't work so well because this sort of area can vary quite a lot. The arms can come across. So what we do actually is we detect the upper body, but when we're doing the tracking, we center on where the head is. We don't detect the head, but the head's, because of the upper body detector, the head's always going to be in this region. So the tracks are found in this area. And then we track forward and backwards in time using KLT tracker, and we have a simple overlap score. So we look at the proportion of, we've got two detections, and for the head region, we look at the proportion of tracks that connect this head region to this head region, and above some threshold, we say that we deem these are the same person. Okay. So this, as I say, this is very, very reliable. See another illustration. Now, so that's how to associate people. I'm going to turn to the false positive part. How do we throw away tracks which are wrong, or how do we throw away detections which are wrong? And here we can view this as a classification problem. We can run this process on many, many videos. We can measure some simple characteristics of the tracks, like the score, the length of the track. These things are often done heuristically, but we can make it slightly more principled by turning it into a classification problem. So everybody will say, oh, if the track's too short, if it's only 3 frames long, I'll throw it away, or if the track moves around too much or overlaps another track. So we try to make this a bit more principled by learning many measures, like about 12 measures, training a simple linear classifier, and we find this is what you need to do. But it's very, very fast. It throws away many of the false positives. So we've now got to the point where we've got good tracks. We have to deal with the problem of fluctuation in the detector. So if you've used one of these detectors, like a sliding window detector, say to detect a face or an upper body, you get this sort of pump in action in scale, because the way these things work is they're running over discrete set of scales, and so between one frame and the next, the scale can change, so you sort of get this sort of breathing and jitter of the detectors quite often. So we can smooth that quite easily using a cost function like this. The barred P's here, P is, say, the X, Y, and scale of the detection. So this is what we've measured, what we're trying to predict to the unbarred ones. And this does two things. It does some temporal smoothing, and it also can interpolate. It can fill in the places where we don't have any detections. Okay? So interpolates and smooths. And then we get out things like this. So this is showing detections. I'll show it again. Okay, let's go in time. And generally, we can track people smoothly as they move, as they change their pose. Okay? So, if one person's occluded by another, we're not solving that by this. If people cross, then we have to use another mechanism to join up. That's quite right. And we can do that by doing some recognition of the person or some colour histogram matching or whatever. But we're not doing that here at all, actually. We're not dealing with the people crossing each other problem. Thank you. Okay, so what? What you're seeing here are upper body tracks. So we're trying to find the upper body, and the reason we're concentrating on the upper body is because, as we can see here, a lot of the time in films, the lower part of the body is truncated, just because you have close-ups and medium shots. The only place where we're using the head region is when we're scoring how many tracks are connected to say if this is the same person or not.
I think the intention was why not just use the face detector?
Because ultimately we're interested in the whole person, and we've got more. I didn't say face at all. And by the way, what we want to do, we don't want to use a face detector because we want to get people from the side, we want to get people from the back. So there's a reason for not using a face detector.
You're allowing for drops and things like that.
Yes.
So if you make the assumption that these are sort of standard movies or sitcoms or something like that.
Yes. Which they are. I don't have to make that assumption. They will be standard movies and sitcoms, yes.
You do or you don't?
They will be standard sitcoms and movies. That's exactly what they are. I don't have to assume that. They are.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, people are going to show the face sometime or the other. So,
Yes.
So I mean, that doesn't seem to be particularly unreasonable to go in that direction and then extrapolate.
Well, okay, so say I want to, the reason I don't want to, in the past we've used faces, frontal and profile, and especially when we're trying to identify people or recognise them, that's the easiest thing to use, okay. But here we want to deal with actions, and people can turn around, you can have actions from the back, so using a face detector would limit us. Is it?
That's why I said you start with the face and then you extrapolate out.
Okay, so just in case you can't hear, what Sharat is saying is that you could start with the face and then extrapolate out, but how would we do it in a reliable way? So we're using we're not using particularly the tracks, the KLT tracks to track. That is, we're not trying to do a tracking problem here. We're just associating the detections. We found that's much more reliable than trying to track. So if we extrapolate out, what would you do if you think about it? As you start with the face detection, great, it's frontal. I turn my face around, or I occlude my face, or I'm now seen from the back. I mean, it's going to be less reliable in terms of finding the person. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about tracking. So now let's assume we've got videos and we've tracked the people, so we have these sort of spatial temporal tubes for each of the people. And now our job is to detect actions. And I think our detection of actions is going to be, or our representation of actions is going to be sort of not so dramatic. We're going to use a sliding window detector along the tracks. But I just want to emphasize again why we've done something which is useful. And that is particularly, I've mentioned before the foreground background separation, but the thing is when we're finding these tracks, we don't care about the actions. So now we've got tracks for all the people in the videos, and they can be doing any action. So first of all, we've reduced the complexity of the video from this massive amount of data just down to a finite number of tracks. And now, for each of these tracks, we're going to find actions, but we can, many actions can occur in that track. We can simply learn a classifier for a particular action, run it across the tracks, then learn a classifier for a new action, run it across the tracks. We've done most of our expensive pre-processing.
That seems a bit like a disadvantage. You're not taking care of the bias that you get by assuming a particular action. Maybe you can actually get much better tracks from assuming that you're getting tracks from a single action.
If our tracks are perfect, just imagine our tracks are perfect, then we've lost nothing. Okay, so it's where if we found our tracks were breaking for a particular action, then that could be the case.
No, but I thought your intention was not so much to get it as good, but just to reduce the data that you were using.
Definitely our intention is to reduce the data and also to do a foreground background separation. So because a lot of these actions, the background is going to confuse any classifier. So that's our intention. But it's also the point that once we've got the tracks, they can be used for any action. If in the future we want to learn some other actions, we're going to have a finite number of actions. If in the future we want to add some more actions or do a multi-class classification of actions, we've got all the data we need for that. So here's our action descriptor. It's a three-dimensional version of the hog. And that's all it comes down to, really. So hog descriptor originally developed for space, captures the orientations. It has a number of cells, and in each cell you have a histogram of orientations. Here we've generalized it to 3D, so in each cell, which is now a 3D volume, we divide it into an icosahedron, so 20 directions. We don't worry about contrast. That gives us sort of 10 orientations we need to store for each of these cells. And then there's the issue of what discretization do you do, and we found on validation data that 5 by 5 in space and 5 in time for the whole action works well. So what we're going to answer the question that Manik brought out earlier. If the action's longer, we're always going to imagine it mapped to something which is 5 hog cells in time long. Okay, so we're going to, when we search for an action, we're going to do the normal sort of time warping where we stretch time, so we search over the start position and the end position effectively.
No, so you're keeping the frame rate the same and do the 5 by 5, or are you actually dropping frames?
All actions will be mapped to the same length. So if they take 20 frames, they'll be matched to 5 hog cells in length. So to summarise what we've got the tracks. We're going to search along each of the tracks for these actions, changing the start and end point. And how we do it is we have a two-stage process. We use the linear SVM, so that's a sort of a cascade, very quickly finds regions we're interested in, and then we have a nonlinear SVM, which gives us a better classification. So let's get to some results. There's a couple
of motion information is just implied in the...
Yeah, this is...
implied by the derivative in time.
Yeah. This is something to come back to, is that because we've done the foreground background separation, that could be bad for us. So I'm going to show here some actions which involve hand movements, drinking and smoking. So that's fine, because by capturing this upper body region, we've captured everything that's there, really.
No, but 5 by 5 by 5, right? Any motion information is not explicitly represented as motion. It's just whatever derivatives show up.
Okay. I thought you were asking a deeper question. Okay, so I'm going to answer. I was answering your deeper question, but so I'll answer your first question. So you have got it's not explicit temporal derivative, so we haven't got optical flow, or we're not explicitly measuring any temporal information apart from the fact that how the hog descriptor is changing. But these gradients are in space and time, by the way. So it's telling you how something's moving in space and time. The sort of spatial temporal work you were doing a long time ago. We had these lovely spatial temporal volumes. It's measuring the surfaces of those. The deeper question I thought you were asking is, say I'm standing up. A lot of the action of standing up is how this box is moving relative to the background. So that's information we're not keeping. On the other hand, often in videos, the cameras pan up as someone stands up, so that information isn't there. Right, back to data. So this is Coffee and Cigarettes. It's a film that Ivan Laktev and Patrick Perez used early on for their realistic action recognition. So Coffee and Cigarettes, you've got the drinking action and you've got the smoking action. They're the two actions that predominate. And the movie consists of a number of stories, and the training and test data are split according to stories. You don't have any characters which are common between the training and test sets. And the idea is you have a number of training sequences, and then in the test sequences you have to, in our case, detect where these actions occur, and you're scored on, do you find it correctly in time and space. So first comparison with some baselines. This is a precision recall curve, so if you haven't seen these before, where you want to be is up here. Okay, so the more the curve is towards this upper right corner, that's better. And the number is the area under the precision recall curve. So a few things to look at. This is the red curve here, assuming it's red, is the one we're doing, which, as you'd expect, gets the best score. The lower one down, if we go down, this is if you... we have this track, and our hog descriptor bends according to the track. If you don't bend, if you just keep it as a a fixed polyhedra, it doesn't bend, you lose some performance, okay, if it doesn't adapt. In this is a bad film for showing that difference, so just to be clear, what I'm saying is that you can see here, it's like snake-like, we're bending the descriptor according to the track. If we kept this straight, what do we lose? Now, in this film where people are sitting down, actually, their tracks don't move so much. But in a film where people are moving around or the camera's moving, then you might get a bigger difference between following the track and not following the track. Okay, but we do follow the track, and that gets the best performance. But there's not such a difference here.
So, Andrew, what's the failure mode? Like, so if I was
failure,
I would say the 5 by 5 by 5 thing is basically saying that you have 5 sub-actions, and that somehow there is no anisotropic scaling of these 5 sub-actions. So person standing, you're dividing sort of into 5 different things.
Yes.
The first sub-action could be really fast for some guy, and then he would slow down eventually when he's rising up. So, and that warp is not being taken into account because you just take your volume and just divide it into 5 equal downstream. So that doesn't seem to sort of like handle this issue.
No. It does a bit because you've walked it linearly, you're right. So if they're moving quickly in the first 2, you would measure that in the spatial temporal derivatives that you're getting from the hog.
Right.
So it is recorded there.
But I would have thought that like a representation could be you have an HMM over your entire track.
Well,
have like this.
That will come later. I mean, what I'm doing, you've got to compare like with like. So I'm going from the sort of bag of words representation to something which is better, and in the next part of the talk I'll go to something which is better still. We haven't yet got to the, where do we go to, which is the HMM on states, and that's where probably we should go to, though we can't be sure about that because sometimes these even stronger representations do lose things because they break en route.
I mean, that could be because of the number of parameters.
Yeah, it could be, or just, as it fails too often because you're relying on too many earlier steps.
The fact that you're blocking it means you're losing somewhere. You don't really care precisely what the thing was, right? You're willing to give up some localization that might make things more robust.
So one point of order, and it's 12:06. The session is supposed to end at 12:30 and then lunch and all that.
But we start at 11:45. Yeah.
Two things. One is, as Monik said, we started a little late. However, the other thing is that we were also thinking of being soft about the end time to give more time for discussion in the session here, and then people can still have informal discussions afterwards. So what I want to do is just keep overall time in mind and decide at what point you want to stop talking so that you can have this.
No, I don't mind finishing early. I'd rather, as you'd imagine, people ask questions while we go. And yes.
How do they do within the time complexity?
How do they?
Time. How much time does it take? Power track, full search, that there's some idea of time.
The processing time. No, I really don't know how long. Ivan took it a few years ago. I can tell you that our tracking now is almost real time. I mean, it's not an issue. These detectors work at pretty much real time, the GPU implementations of them. So the detectors is not an issue. Joining them up is pretty much real time as well. So hog detectors, again, this is a hog detector in space and time. So it isn't at the moment. It's done in MATLAB. It could be done in C. It could be done on GPUs. I think for this sort of work, you're getting to video rate for many of these things. They're not there yet, but with a certain amount of work, they would be there.
There's training time.
There's what?
Training.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed. There's training time, but at runtime, once you've trained all these things, it would move towards real time. Right.
All computation is free anyway now.
Training time.
Question there then, Ram.
How do you evaluate precision and recall for tracks? So you have some ground truth track, and then do you do an association first, track to track?
To track, yes.
Association.
Yes.
And then there's some bounding box around centroids. You say do centroids overlap? Is that how you indicate that
there's different levels of how to do it, okay, and it comes down to cost. So ultimately, you could imagine doing the full track of the person, and then you're intersecting one track to another, and we usually use an overlap score. So we usually, when we intersect two things, we look at the intersection over the union, and we require that that's greater than 0.5.
So it's like a ribbon
Yeah, but that becomes extremely expensive to annotate because you'd have to annotate every single frame. So what we did here was a shortcut where we took the centre of the track and did a rectangle, and then we did the centre, the end and start of the track, and so we used that as sort of a proxy. So it would have been too expensive to
Okay, so it's
annotate.
parallel pipe.
Not necessarily parallel because it can wind around, but.
Okay, but the beanie.
Yeah, being and the centre, somewhere towards the centre, it had to overlap with that as well. That's the annotation we did.
So this curve is actually for action recognition, not for tracks, correct?
Yes, that's right, yes. We have, if you look at the papers, we do have precision recall curves for tracks. This is now onto actions, yes.
I have a question about a micro detail.
Yes.
Wouldn't these curves depend on the density of actions?
Yes, the density of actions or density of tracks.
Density of actions, like does the drinking happen every 10 minutes or does it happen every 30 seconds? Much like
Yeah.
object detection.
Yeah,
where
yeah. You're right, there'll be
one
a...
object in the image, you will get more false alarms.
Yeah. So, and you could imagine a random detector as well. You know, so if it's happening continuously, a random detector would still, which just randomly chose, things would end up, a random detector would give you a horizontal line, but the end point would depend on the density. That's your point. Yes.
So in some way, these things should be normalized.
Yeah, they should.
People have learned to do it for objects.
Yeah, that's true. Not necessarily normalised, but you should give the random compared to random. Yeah, but these are. I am trying to compare to baselines, and that gives some idea of normalisation. That's the point of this graph, actually. So, just maybe these are the work we've done. If we don't use tracks and we do this same hog descriptor, but search over the whole spatial temporal volume. So, of course, some of the time we're searching over just background. This is the curve we get, and this is Ivan Laptev's curve. Where I'm going to show a better curve by him in a second, but this was his sort of baseline for this same work. So based on, there's two things are changing here. The author's changing, but also the descriptor's changing. But again, it gives you sort of a baseline of the difficulty of not quite random, but just baseline methods, and what you gain by using better methods. So I'm going to show some results, and I'll come back to state-of-the-art measurements. So one of the things you can do is once you've done these detections, of course you can show the results, but you can also have a different way of interacting with the video. And something that Anadan and I've wanted to do for a long time is to have a more interesting way of interacting with videos. So rather than just fast forward a video until you get to the bit you want, what you'd like to be able to do is to fast forward based on something. So based on the person being there or based on the action. So that's what I'm going to show now. I'll show these results. So this is for the drinking action. So the video is going to start playing. Can we have the sound, please?
Is it connected?
Yeah, it was playing before. Just turn it. Yeah.
Does that. If you just want to take out the thing, we could probably hear your laptop.
No, I can't hear. No, it's going to be very quiet. Sorry. It's playing here. Yeah, it was working before. I don't know.
This is not. Yeah.
Okay, so this is sort of the new interaction. You fast forward until you get to the action you want, and then play it. So here, green is correct and red is incorrect.
I even know a certain surgical procedure that I can perform using a drill. Well, me about it. I'm saying caffeine leads.
Okay, enough of this, okay? So this is what you can do. Now back to state-of-the-art. So this method currently is the best of the state-of-the-art. So competitors, this is our curve from last year. There's a work from ETH Zurich group, Luc van Gool's group, where they were using a jumping window. And this is the original best results of Ivan Laptev, which was using keyframe priming. So, 3 years on, we'd expect to do better, and we are doing better. But it shows how we're not losing things by taking the stronger representation of a spatial temporal volume around the people compared to state of the art.
In this case, what is the parameter that you're adjusting for precision and recall?
The classifier response, that's as is normal, yeah. Smoking, these are showing keyframes of the shots where people are smoking. So it just so happens that it's the same character is quite high up here, that you're getting Tom Waits down here being discovered.
So all the examples you showed has the characteristic of at least people sitting down in a cafe type of environment.
Yeah.
Like at least the smoking one.
Yes,
and so on.
yes.
But
So
people often smoke standing up.
yeah,
Matter?
I agree. And so when Laptev and Perez introduced this film, it was good and bad. You know, they were introducing realistic data. That was really good. But actually, the film they introduced, and I suggested this film because they wanted to do coffee and smoking, is very constrained. It turns out. And so, but now these new data sets, these Hollywood data sets, much less constrained. You know, more camera actions, obviously more people, not in a sitting down situation. So we've taken this Hollywood 2 data set, which was originally for classification, not saying localization, and we've added annotation, sort of annotation I was talking about, for 2 actions so far, phoning and standing up. So now we are going to see people standing up and phoning, or sitting down and phoning. So these are the actions we want to detect now in these films. So it's a number of films, about 100 different films, and you have about an hour for training, consisting of many different sequences, and an hour for testing, containing many different sequences.
But the key difference, from what I understand, between the Hollywood dataset and the coffee and cigarettes dataset is that here you don't have any non-classes, right?
Yeah, you do. Yeah. But you did in that case as well. So by non-classes, they're not drinking all the time, for example, and right. Here they're not phoning all the time.
But here you have. Isn't everything split into? It's not the full movie, right? It's
sequences. So for the phoning class, right. There'll be people will not be. They'll be neutral, doing no action or none of these defined actions. Then they'll phone. Then they'll put the phone down again. They'll be neutral again. So it's not cut strictly at the start of the phone and the end of the phoning action.
I see.
So the neutral ones as well.
You are given. But are you given the full phoning action as one unit and say, okay, there is some action in there?
In training, you're given the start and end point. In testing, you're not. So in training, you have available the neutral actions, but you know where the start and end of the phoning action is. So you're given all the data. And similarly, in testing, you're given all the data. You don't know where the actual phoning action occurs. So it's a real
detection. Know that there is an action in this space of data?
No.
It could be there's...
So
are there clips with no actions at all?
There can be, but no, there are not, okay. But there are neutral parts in the action. So the test here will be you take all the test material, which will have many different actions. It will have standing up, it will have hugging, all the actions that are there, and it will have people doing nothing, as you'll see, because it's only one person might be doing the action. There'll be other people in the scene that are not doing anything.
Well, I guess what my worry is that so you have how many actions? You have 11? No.
Well, we're going to just show 2 here, actually.
Two actions, yeah. Right? So now, if each clip has one action.
No. Here there'll be, say it's 11 actions in the Hollywood data set.
Right.
There'll be all 11 actions will be there at some point in the test data.
Right. So, but then if you know in this clip there is an action, then it's very easy to classify which action it is first. And once you know which action it is, it's easier to find it. You see what I mean?
I don't agree, because there are lots of people as I said, there are lots of people you're not just seeing it here, but there can be lots of people, and some of them doing the action and some aren't. And I don't think it is easy to classify the action. My argument really is that it's easier to classify the action once you're concentrating on people, rather than doing a sort of bag of words model for the whole clip. So I think you're arguing that classification is easier than...
Right, which is different from in the previous clip. It is detection, right? Could be just minutes and minutes with nothing happens, and you need to figure out that nothing happens. Here, it seems that there is a simple trick you can do to kind of cheat the system.
No, but I still think you're not seeing the difficulty of it. There are many people, and there are neutral, even with the person who's going to do the action, there'll be neutral places where they're not doing anything.
Okay, well, we can look at that.
I mean, in the pure detection case of images, we know that classification gives better results than detection. It probably is not such the case here, I think, because you've got this time dimension. So, and certainly, the results we're getting are based on the state of the art, and people are generally trying to do the classification task anyway. It's not many people are doing the detection task. Okay, so we're going to apply the same method to these Hollywood films. These are results for standing up. I'll show results for phoning. So we've run the same process as I've shown before, and now we're going to run through this hour of test material and show results we get for phoning. So here you're seeing various... There's no sound on this. This is okay.
But is this flipped, or is it the full flip? The full segment?
Well, what you're seeing is you're seeing the test material, and we're showing where the phoning is occurring.
But
okay?
are you playing the whole set, the whole clip?
Of the test material, yes. Yeah, so we're reordering the test material.
Right, but you see, that's it's very tightly.
Yeah, wait a minute. You'll see on the next one that it's less so. As in the next thing I'm going to show. Okay, this is a mistake. But here I think it'll be clearer, because here I'm going to show more analysis of the shot structure. So I think I understand the point you're making, okay, but these methods, as I'll show, do deal with neutral actions as well. So, yeah.
Are you moving on to interactions?
I am. I'll just start these playing manic because they'll keep playing anyway. So here I'm going to look at 4 interactions: handshakes, hugs, kisses, and high fives from various TV comedies, situation comedies, soaps, etc. And here's just showing some of the material. Go on, Manic.
So what I wanted to ask was, you motivated by this by saying, okay, we have the latent SVM model from Pedro and Deva, and you can just give it some training data and it works. So
for the upper body detection. That was for upper body detection.
So what if we gave it training data of people drinking coffee, like a face, a mug here and a hand like that, and that's the only training data we did, and just go and detect now all of the frames. How well would that do compared to all this machine?
Well, there's 2 answers to that. One is that would lose this benefit of finding the tracks and then reducing the complexity by only concentrating on tracks. But I haven't done that for this case. I have done it for poses, where you look for a particular pose and you compare that to trying to solve for the pose first. And there was no great benefit, in fact. So we weren't in training for a specific pose. So we weren't losing much by looking for an upper body and then within those upper body detections finding the pose. But I haven't done it in this case, look for a particular action.
But computationally, won't that be cheaper, because then at test time, because you don't have to do the whole, because you have to do the tracking and this thing in any case, right?
I don't think it'll be much quicker actually, because you're still having to look at all the, to do the detections compared to looking for the actions. You're sweeping through the data once. It would be one thing quicker, but you'd have to do that over time warping. You'd have to do it over space and time. I don't know that it would be much quicker. The reason for mentioning interactions is you've got extra cues you can use. So if you have an action like phoning, which is just done by one person, okay, basically all you've got there is that the person and the object they're interacting with, but there's nothing else. Here, if you've got interactions, then you've got 2 people, so you can measure things from 2 tracks, effectively. And the extra things we're going to look at are head orientation, are the people looking towards each other, because in interactions they often do look towards each other. Proximity, how close are they? Are they far apart or close apart? And then what's the relationship if you've got multiple tracks?
How do you do this head orientation?
I'll show you. Let's go on. So head orientation we do by a sort of hog descriptor and then an SVM classifier. So it's, at the moment we classify it into a number of directions. All of these things could be improved. You can make it into a regression. Given the head detection, that then affects the descriptor we use, because we then use that to switch which cells are active in a hog descriptor. For context, we we quantize things into sort of very close, adjacent, far away. And we put all of this together into a structured SVM. So what this means is that for each case in our training data, we have a loss function which penalizes us according to how much we differ from the ground truth. So in this case, the people should be facing each other, that they're not close, they're sort of adjacent to each other but not very close to each other. And all of this information goes in, and there's another track here which is not taking part in this interaction. This all goes into the loss function. And we learn a classifier based on all this information. And the sort of thing you learn, here's showing the weight, so white is high, for the four interactions we're looking at. So the way to interpret this is if the person's looking this way, then this is the sort of distance you might expect, which is not too close. And if you compare that with if they're looking this way, then the other person should be about this far away. And in terms of hugging and kissing, you can see that the people are supposed to, the other person relative to the person we're looking at should be closer, which is what you expect in a hug and kiss. That's what's learned. Okay, so now coming to some results. This is quite new work, so I don't have comparisons to state of the art, for example, because nobody else has done this yet. So, Alosha, this is going to answer a bit your question. So I'm going to show you some clips, and along the bottom you'll see representations of the tracks of the people. And these boundaries, like here, are the shot. So usually, well, in this case anyway, the interaction is going to occur in one shot, and these other shots, which are all part of the test material, will be neutral. So that's a proportion of 1 to 4, 1 here. So it's only a quarter of it is going to be the actual action. And they're color-coded according to the classifier. So the color code is written down the bottom here. Okay, so we play this. So this man is approaching this woman. He's building up courage. He's going to shake her hand. And so at that point, you can see the score is very high down here for handshake.
So it's interesting that you don't actually see the hand for handshake.
Let's say it again, see. You see the arm, of course.
Yeah, not doing any detections of the arms.
Oh, well, the descriptor is outside the upper body region.
Yeah, your descriptor does not include the hands and the arms.
It does, actually. No, it does, if you look at the size of it. So it's not just based... Here's the upper body detection. The descriptor is a much larger region.
All right. Okay.
Let's have another example. This is from Friends. So now we're going to have a high five coming up. It's just one shot. There's a high five. And you can see this guy, Joey, he's not taking part in this. And that's correctly shown. Here's his track, and he doesn't have any high five action. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about actions, and my time has run out. So I can say something very, very quickly about pose. Let me spend 5 minutes on pose, and then I'll stop. So, as I said before, from a single image, you can tell what people are doing. So this is our motivation for being interested in pose, as well as looking at pose over time, which is the point that Pawan was making. Here's the sort of thing we want to be able to get out. We want to be able to get out the limb positions, like as a stick man. And from poses, we know what people are doing. This is what these are showing. This is true in painting, sculpture, also in art. You can tell what the actions and activities are. This is sort of a picture for Aaron as well. It's a very difficult problem for the same reasons we've seen before, because there can be different viewpoints, there can be clutter, and there's deformation of people. We've got articulations. This is the basic thing of a human. Okay, we have to deal with all of this. Again, the community has really done very well. There's various methods which have been developed. We started on this in 2008. Other people have started more recently. People have been generously making code available. We make code available. And the progress has happened for all the other reasons that have gone on in computer vision. There's better descriptors, there's better learning algorithms, there's better segmentation algorithms, all of these, there's better optimization algorithms at low complexity. All of these have contributed to making these methods work. I'm going to skip actually how they do work, so that's what I will show here, and just show where they don't work. So here is good results. You can the stickman correctly. Methods at the moment don't work. So here's a case where the camera is going to pan. You see, fine, this is good, I consider this working. The camera pans down. Truncation is not modelled, so the whole, at the moment it's assumed that the whole upper body or the limbs have to be seen. If they're not, ridiculously, that's not modelled, so it fails. Similarly, occlusion, you see here, the person's partly occluded, that's not modelled. By and large, the person's occluded here by an object, occluded here by another person, not modelled. Obviously could be, but isn't done yet, so this is where we're at. I'll end then with a demo. So one of the things we want to be able to do is to search on poses. Okay, so this is another way of interacting with videos. I want to find where someone's doing this in a video. Maybe I can look at fights or see if people are thinking, or from their pose I can work out what's going on. Okay, so I'd like to be able to do that. We started doing this a year ago, very much offline. So the processing is for every single frame in the video, you find the people using upper body detector, you find their pose in various ways. And then, given a query pose, you want to rank all the shots in the video, or in many videos, by those that are close to that query pose. So here's an example we did a while ago, so showing it because it's Indian-like. So you start with a query pose from Gandhi. Here's a query pose. And you then look through Hugh Grant movies, and you can find this pose here, that's in a mirror. Or here's Rowan Atkinson doing that pose. Okay, so you can find people based on their pose. Okay, so 1 year on, the sort of thing we can do now is do this live. So hopefully we'll do this live. So here we've taken about 20 films. We found poses in every frame of all of these. We've run a filter to throw out ones which we think are wrong. And now we can, given a query pose, we can search through millions of these poses in real time. And the way we do that is to not do a linear search through all the poses, that would be too expensive, but to use an approximate nearest neighbour method, and this is something else that's been well developed by David Lowe and others, to search through this very large number. So hopefully we can go to a demo. Right, so here, what you're seeing here is a query pose, and here you're seeing returns from various films. So here I'm showing each of these corresponds to a different shot. And information below it tells you what film it comes from. So this is from Pretty Woman, this is from A Fish Called Wanda, and it also tells you which time period it occurs. And of course we can play these clips or look at them in more detail. And as I change the query pose, you can see how in real time the films that are selected change, so we can look for any pose we want. So if I just switch off this background, and I can grab the stick man, and I can in real time move and search through all these films, finding all these poses, finding all these actions. Okay, so let me stop there.
So I want to take about.
I just want to say something very important. I want this person here to stand up. This is Nataraj, and he's the person that did this pose demo.
Is he working with you?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm all good. Well, let's take some time for questions here before we break out for lunch. Yes, sir.
So, all these practice test videos and training videos are from Hollywood movies. So, movies are basically from director, right? So this point of view where he controls the camera and everything. So predicting what director is going to think is, you said, predicting the action or what is going to happen in the video. So is that how is this goal directly?
Okay, so the predicting what's going to happen next was something that was really just for Alyosha, because Alyosha had raised this as a possibility and something he thought was good to do, and it comes from work from Antonio Torralba. So I'm not really addressing that yet. So my interest really is to make the videos searchable in the way that Google can search web pages. I want to make videos searchable on everything, on who's there, on what they're doing, on what their pose is. So that's my goal. So my goal is not necessarily to predict what's going to come next, but to answer your question, you could imagine that for routine things, you could put in the editing style, and then you could predict how this will be shot next, or what the person's going to do next. Given enough, you can see here we're looking at 20 films. You could have hundreds of films, and then you could simply learn a regression on what comes next. To answer your question.
So, if the testing data is from a CCTV or a camera like that,
yes.
Are we getting the results would be same or?
So the difference from a CCTV camera might be the resolution and the temporal sampling, but that's going to gradually go away. I mean, at the moment, you know, a few years ago it used to be VHS tapes that we use again and again, and it would be every few seconds, and that's all changing. So maybe the difference between, I don't know if people want to comment on this, but between Hollywood movies and surveillance cameras will just be that there's not this editing and a fixed viewpoint camera, which might just pan slightly. But, you know, see, films are always cut into shots. You're not going to have that with surveillance cameras, probably. So maybe the difference in the resolution difference will just go away, I think. And therefore, you could do these things on surveillance cameras anyway. You know, you've always got problems with low resolution, but there's no reason why these methods shouldn't work on surveillance cameras now. Here, where? Gents, hi.
I think it's very exciting to see that you're now at the stage that you can really mine videos and search effectively. And I think that this, connecting to a discussion we recently had, Jenna was talking about post-its and we looked at stick figure models. How much do you think we need to do stick figure models to sort of generalize or make action recognition more robust?
I think it works both ways. That for some actions you need stick figures and they're going to work really well. So things which involve the hands and where they're not occluding each other, or subtle things, you're going to need the arms and the hands to be found. For other cases it's going to be detrimental. You know, for standing up where you maybe don't see the hands or arms, you don't want to find stick figures. So it won't be that there's one representation which solves all problems. There'll be multiple representations. Sometimes bag of words will be the right representation to use. So it will depend on the action.
Learn what's the appropriate technique.
Yes. Yes, I mean, if you think about people hugging, or actually, or kissing, you know, you might not, hugging, you maybe see one person's arms, but obviously you don't see the other person's arms. Kissing, maybe that's not such a hand-based thing. Yes, we'll have to learn what representations are appropriate for what actions. Go on, you master it and I'll answer. Yeah.
You were answering questions.
Yeah.
Have you tried this algorithm on a more constrained set of video, which is like sports video, and then evaluate its performance? It would seem you have the potential for summarization, right? Sports video summarization.
Yes. No, I don't like sports videos. I refuse to work on sports videos, so I haven't. But to me, sports videos have their own set of problems, you know, because sometimes the segmentation problem can be easier. People have done a lot of tracking on sports videos, actually. There's work from Joseph Sullivan, for example, on keeping track of all the players in a sports video. So there's different, and identifying who they are. So there are different goals there, but I haven't done it myself.
Good.
Who? Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for your excellent presentation.
Thank you.
My question is about interactions. Say, for example, your system learns interactions like kiss, hug, and so on.
Like my interactions like?
Yeah.
Like what?
Kissing,
yes.
and so on.
Yes.
Say, for example, my interactions happens at the affect level, like emotional level.
Yes.
Without any physical
yes.
attachment between
yeah.
them. So will you be able to learn these kind of emotional interactions?
Yeah, so there is some work going on sort of micro expressions. But I mean, now I haven't done any work on this, but I imagine if you start concentrating on the face, we're at a position now where if the resolution is good enough, we can very accurately detect the eyes, nose, mouth, etc., with very good accuracy. So if at that point you've got a registration for the face, and you could start learning these micro expressions and see how people react, and the iris opens if you've got the resolution. So I haven't done it myself, but it's a position where we could start doing that. I think emotion recognition is an interesting thing to work on in video, yeah, and in images generally. If what? If they, yes, it's sort of people reacting to things as well. Yeah, I mean, you can. It's going to be interesting as we move on to these more subtle things, and we will. Yeah, it's future work. He's not in charge. Yes, sorry. Please answer.
Alyosha distracted me.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of the hugging and kissing case? So
yes.
Hugging and kissing have overlapping actions?
Yeah, overlapping people, yes.
People hug
yes,
people,
yes.
they kiss or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, when you are kissing someone, you actually are hugging them too. So there are two dominant actions.
No, not necessarily. I mean, if you're sort of kissing people on the cheeks.
Dolphins kissing, they don't hug.
Yeah.
Okay, just in the case where
I'll go with that.
hugging and kissing, so
yes.
There is two dominant actions in the same sequence. So is that work on hierarchically deciding which is the most dominant, and then, you know?
So, I mean, at the moment, our descriptor is a bit clunky. I did apologise for it, and I do think we'll do better. And Pawan Kumar was raising the issue of having a number of states. And I think that's where I want to go to, is to look at these states. So you're right. I mean, people would come in, you know, you'd break down the action into movements. That's what I think we'll try and do. So the movement will be coming together, raising arms, you know, then putting arms around. So the basic contour will be the movements, and then they'll perform the states, and we'll have maybe an HM on top of that, which will say, oh no, this is a kiss, not a hug, because we go to this next state. But that's not what we're doing yet.
That's it?
Yep.
Ah.
Yes, we find stick men for every single person, yes. That's where I want to go, is describe actions as a set of stick man motions, yes. For certain actions, it will be okay. I didn't have time to talk about it, but I gave various methods. We have our own method, but there's other methods which we're using. But basically, the methods at the moment, they usually proceed by finding an upper body to cut down the search space, and then have some way of finding where the limbs are by doing a pictorial structure like search. But other people are developing other methods, but it basically comes down to trying to fit a tree structure at the moment to the image data within a region.
No more questions?
What happens if especially during the interactions, if the scale changes temporarily? Does this still work?
So in the previous work, what we were doing was temporal warping, meaning we were looking for the start and end of every action and searching over that.
You mean spatial scale?
No, you meant temporal or spatial scale? Yeah, you mean temporal, because the spatial scale is covered by the upper body detection. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, it's still this clunky descriptor, which I can't, I just apologise for. With time, hidden Markov models are very well developed for dealing with these temporal changes. So that's one answer to your question for the future.
You had a question in the back.
Sure.
Just to end, so how many false positives did you get with the cat sequence and diving sequence?
With which?
The cat sequence.
The one at the beginning? Yeah, well, sorry. This is the bad talk, because a good talk starts with the motivation and then shows the results on that at the end, and I haven't got the results on it, so I apologise for that. Okay. But I finished the talk early, so...
It's a good talk, but that's a future one.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's probably a good place to stop for lunch. But before we do that, I have been told that I will have the honor of awarding some kind of token gifts to our speakers. So you get more than support for singing. You get a book and a song.
Thank you very much.
So, Andrew, thank you so much.
Okay, good.
You get something to do. Next speaker is Manik. I don't know if he'll get anything. He's probably the one who went and bought these. Thank you so much for coming. Okay.